Good afternoon, Dr. Campbell. So, today I will be providing you with a little background on the Symbionese Liberation Army. I chose this as my topic because I wanted to pick something that we did not necessarily delve too much into this semester. Well, we did dive into the topic of terrorism, but not so much of a discussion on past groups that have existed in America, particularly the SLA, which I personally had not heard of before. The journal article, a news article I found, really expanded my knowledge on this group and gave me more insight to domestic aspects of terrorism. I also wanted to discuss a domestic terrorist group that was specifically leftist, which you don't really see often. And I know this sounds odd, but I say this because I grew up on the narrative that Republicans were bad and Democrats were good, that they were the right group. And they followed the most forward thinking policies, the policies that would benefit um, the people at best, which, through education and research on my own, that is not the case at all, that both parties, do have good and bad. And so I just wanted to freshen things up a bit and discuss something I found fascinating and went against the narrative that I was originally taught. And going on to slide 2 here. So, what is the Symbionese Liberation Army? So, on this slide, I'm going to kind of give a little bit of the background and rise of the group, and then what they're fighting for. So, the SLA is a leftist domestic terrorist group that came about in the early to mid 1970s in the San Francisco East Bay area. From the knowledge I gained about this group, they committed plenty of heinous crimes, murders, bombings, and created a lot of destruction, particularly in California, which I will discuss those acts in the next slide. Out of many revolutionary groups, they are considered to be the most deadly. So, to kind of go back a little further to the SLA's creation, you have to go back to the 1960s, where the New Left became a movement, which is like the post World War II left movement, you guess you can say. And during this time in the 1960s, the civil rights movement was picking up heat. There was a lot of clashing of both sides, I guess you could say. People were becoming very passionate about their views, and there was a good amount of aggression gaining movement with with a passion for revolution. Vietnam was occurring, which we know was a disaster, and so many people died. And people witnessed the killings of students by the National Guard and local police at Jackson State in May of 1970. People also witnessed the siege of Chicago in 1968 as well. And I think when people have such discontent with so much going on around them, it's inevitable that violence will occur. I mean, you can kind of see that in today's world, with the amount of violence that occurs by police, um, and yeah, that kind of situation there. So by the 1970s, there are numerous left and right groups inciting violence, but one of the more prominent one gaining traction is the SLA. So something I found interesting was that they were fighting for things that are not wrong to fight for, but fighting for them in the worst way possible, which I think is so interesting because you see this time and time again with terrorist groups, and there's like a very specific way that they go about making their case. Um, and I feel like it's just carried by so much emotion at times that it's not really thoroughly thought out as like how are we going to achieve this goal of changing these policies. Like it's not it's very much so driven by emotion. um, so to go back, George Lester Jackson, who I've included an image of here, he was a convicted man that spent most of his life behind bars, and during that time he read a lot. And Um, a lot of what he read was around Karl Marx, and he left prison with a strong dedication to Black Revolution. But as we know, or as you will learn, it's through violence. And he became the leader of the SLA. Go to the next slide here. So for this slide, I am going to touch on just some of the members of the SLA. Here above, we do have two different kind of collages of different members within the group. And just kind of acts of terror that they had committed. So George Lester Jackson, who I'd mentioned on the last slide, is the SLA leader. A few other known members were Russell Little, Joseph Romero, Nancy Ling Perry, and Catherine Celaya. But there were many more. And during, I guess you can say about till like the late 70s, this group had, fostered like a lot of members and kind of had gained a lot of notoriety in a sense. Um, but the SLA committed many historical crimes, such as the murder of the Oakland school superintendent, Marcus Foster. And apparently it was because he promoted like an identification system for students. But funny enough, that by the time that he was murdered, he had already let go of supporting a cause like that. Um, and so that kind of like just reading that kind of gave me an idea that like this group was pretty messy and didn't really care of who they were killing. And there wasn't like, I guess, as much strategy as it might have seemed that they were putting into like their crimes. Um, a notable crime that actually made national headlines and had like a very watched court case was the kidnapping of Patricia Campbell Hearst, who is the heiress of the Hearst family. Um, this story is interesting, particularly because Patricia actually decided to stick to the SLA and claim allegiance. I think, by like 55 days of her being kidnapped, and she had actually joined in on it. And I don't know. I do not think that they found out if this was true or if she was claiming allegiance because she was forced to or brainwashed to, or if this was like a repercussion of like Stockholm syndrome. But other crimes like robberies, bombings, and assaults were committed by the group on a regular basis. And Hearst actually, like I stated, pledged allegiance to the SLA, continued to commit acts of crime, um, and like I stated, uh, went to trial for that, which was very, like, much so the talk of the town at the time. So to go down to the last and fourth slide, and this is just kind of doing a little bit of a closing and then fall of the SLA, which, after I'm done, you will notice that it was not that like of a built up thing, um, of their group kind of falling. So Patricia became a part of the SLA and became a devoted follower and continues to commit and partake in the crime. Like I mentioned, her eventual court hearing and process was a very popular sentencing, and at the time attracted a lot of attention. And kind of like for the fall of it, a lot of the members went to jail at different times for committing crimes um, that they were committing, and the group slowly died out. And probably, still has members like how the KKK does still today, but I guess for the SLA particularly are more underground. I feel like the KKK is more of like an unfortunately common following now. Like it's actually more common than you realize. Um, but to my understanding, the SLA is now a pretty non-existent group. But interestingly, like with how the political culture and sphere is moving in today's world, I wouldn't be surprised to see extreme groups like this continue to grow or increase in following. And I think that this is something that we should be a little bit more attentive to. And that's kind of why I also wanted to, like, why I think this is such an important topic, because history really does, like, as repetitive as it sounds, history really does truly repeat itself. And I think that if we don't acknowledge the amount of divide and separation there is, we could possibly end up in situations where we see a lot of more crimes like this today. So thank you so much.